Welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. Today we are going to be talking to Swami Khecaranatha. I'm going to refer to him as Naughty G from now on. And we're talking about his book, The Divine Thread, the Stillness Sutras. So welcome, Naughty G.
Thank you very much. Yes, happy to be here and happy to see you again.
It's great to see you. I really enjoyed reading this book. When I was reading it, I literally felt energy. Like I felt energy surges throughout reading this book. And I don't know if that was your intention or if that's happened to other readers, but that's what happened to me when I was reading. It literally, each time I would read a passage, it would put me in a different state. Is that typical of most of your readers?
I would say typical of most of my readers, because the people who would read a book like this are certainly doing some kind of spiritual practice, trying to really discover that energetic force within themselves. And really, words are energy, and so then it's just another way of that energy being transmitted, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had many experiences, where people buy one of my books and really connect to the energy and become students, because that's in a sense that's the connecting point.
Mm-hmm.
And same, my teacher Rudy died 1973, and he has a couple of books out, and people still read that and have this powerful connection to him, and maybe they find me or one of the other teachers within our lineage. So yeah, that it's just energy that's expressed through words versus through, say, stillness. Yeah.
Okay, and so there's 19 sutras in here. For people who aren't familiar with sutras, where did you come up with these sutras, and what are sutras?
Well, sutra basically it's an aphorism. It's a short statement of truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And most throughout in the tradition, sutras are very clear and totally vague, right? In the sense that they're trying to invoke an inquiry in people, or to make a statement that causes them to stop and connect and want to know what that means.
Mm.
So the sutras are traditional texts, whether it's Tantric or Buddhist, many are called sutras. And I wrote all the sutras. Yeah.
Oh, you did? Okay, wow. All
Yeah.
right. So when I was reading the sutras, what was funny, because when I would in the morning do inner contemplation, what came to me was that I need to sit in silence and stillness more. This always almost inevitably happens with all of my books. They're always divinely timed. So when I got this book, when it was called the Stillness Sutras, I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
Right.
Why is stillness so important? And I know that that's kind of like I want to go back. I'm going to ask that question, and then I'm going to go back all the way to the beginnings of the book when you talk about all the other foundational pieces. But why is stillness so important?
Well, I think in many ways, but stillness is the doorway into presence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we are so caught up, we're so engaged in the energy of life that we often miss its source, which is that consciousness, which is that presence.
Mm-hmm.
And so by really becoming truly still inside, we whether it's the stillness of our mind, the stillness of our emotions, ultimately the stillness of our own will, then it's an internalization rather than an externalization, right? Because the world is full of form, and our mind and our thoughts are just form. And so if we can just let go of that and become very still inside, then we are turning our awareness back on itself, so that that our own awareness can reveal that all of that form, all of that energy is an expression of that consciousness. And so stillness is the doorway into that consciousness.
Okay,
Right?
so ironically, or maybe not ironically, a big fire engine comes swooping by your window at the
Right.
time that
Yeah.
you're talking about stillness and tuning.
Well,
And so, but here's what happened to me. And actually, at the same time, I realized that I had done a previous recording that was picture in picture versus split screen. So I wanted to change the visual image. I mean, so both of these things happened simultaneously. But what happened was I was listening to, my energy was getting focused on the truck, and then that I needed to switch this setting in my computer, and so my energy was going out, like going out in all different directions. And instead of having my energy going back in those, I think in the book you call it horizontal. Is that
mhm.
right? Horizontal energy, where it's all energy, right? So all of a sudden my energy went out like this. What's that noise? I've got to go check my split screen, all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's actually pulling that energy back into us. Is that
Yeah,
what does that mean?
so all of that, the horizontal is actually our engagement with the world, right?
Hmm.
So you said something about fire trucks. I didn't hear any fire trucks.
You still don't hear the one in the background? Are you
I'm,
joking?
I'm joking. The point is, life goes on, but we can remain in a place of stillness that uh, doesn't project itself outward.
Hmm.
Right? We can then internalize our energy and exactly, in fact, turn our energy vertical, which is what this book is really all about. The
Hmm.
ascent of Kundalini through the psychic body, through the chakras, ultimately finding even that unimpeded channel within the psychic body that arises all the way through the psychic body and in a sense to the space above our head, which is still part of the psychic body, even though it feels like it's outside of ourselves. So
Right.
that's really the vertical,
Right.
right?
The
So the
vertical energy.
stillness, exactly. The stillness is the ability to be connected in that horizontal and that vertical at the same time, right? And
Mm.
not to lose contact with ourselves as we engage the horizontal, as we engage the world, as we engage form, right?
Okay, so let's actually take you, and I mean, I think that the fire truck was a divine intervention, right? So
There you go.
you have a fire truck, and then when I talk about the fire truck, another fire truck emerges. So
Right.
you have the fire truck. Where my monkey mind went was to follow the noise of the fire
Right.
truck and say, "Oh, I wonder what's going to happen with the sound in the show." What happened to you? And I mean, you clearly heard the fire truck too. You're here in my presence, and you're trying to hold both what you described as a vertical presence as well as a horizontal presence, right? So you hear it, but at the same time, you're still going through and connecting down, down the energy down, and then the energy back up. So, what happened to you during that fire? I just want to know what happened to you during that fire truck zooming by.
Some part of my awareness was aware there was a fire truck, right?
Okay.
And that's all, because look, we as humans, we as spiritual beings function in, a whole uh, array, a continuum of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The highest consciousness within us is ever present, and the lowest level of consciousness is in us is ever present.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so the our spiritual training, our sadhana, is the ability to be connected to both, right? And particularly to not get distracted or pulled outside of ourselves by the world, by the noises of the world, the fire trucks of the world, our, the challenges of the world, right? And yet to remain centered inside, and then to find from that center to find that pathway of, of which is an energetic pathway back to consciousness, which is that which we were birthed from, right?
Mm-hmm.
We Kundalini, which is just energy, it's called Kundalini Shakti. We as individuals are that individuated expression of that divine consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so our sadhana, and with our eyes wide open, we can deal with what is apparent. This apparent duality is only an apparent duality,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not separate. The fire truck is not separate from the deepest, most still, freed place within ourselves. It's all happening on the field of consciousness. One
Mm-hmm.
field of
Right.
So, we're learning to be a juggler, if you will, to be able to engage the world and even have our thoughts without those thoughts interfering with our connection to ourself.
Okay, I've had two instances this morning prior to this interview. One was my husband was talking about James Comey, the FBI director, being fired by Trump, and all the, gosh, isn't it suspicious that he's getting fired right before he actually, reveals all this information about
Right.
all this stuff, and my husband just went sideways on this, like and it's funny because I think I would normally go there with him, but because I've been reading this book over the last couple of days, I just thought, okay, well, yeah, that is unfortunate. If I can see how you could see, I can see how potentially the Republicans are spinning this information, or maybe not. Maybe I really don't know what's happening, but I was just trying to understand what were the thought patterns. In your book, you talk about his thought patterns that was generating an unease to the point that he was up an hour last night in a state of like fear and anxiety from this whole situation. So it was interesting because it mapped very much to what you said in the book. He had a thought, and the thought then accumulated into an emotion of fear and anxiety, which resulted in a bodily sensation of not being able to sleep. And this morning and throughout the day, he's had this kind of sense of unease throughout the whole time.
Sure.
And I wanted to listen and find out what was. And the funny thing is I was listening and wanted to truly understand, but and here's the stuff that maybe not helpful. It's like that. I hope I don't catch that, whatever that is.
Right.
Because I was in this still place.
Right.
I was
Yeah.
in this still place. And what's interesting is I got to the place, and I don't even know why. Maybe it's because I proceeded by reading this book. As I said, think what you may about Trump and what he's doing, and but the fact of the matter is I can look at the democracy and say that the government as it was broken. Something needed to change. And so, like Kali, Trump is coming, and this is my story. Okay, I know this is my story. Is coming and changing things, and you're assuming it's for the worse, but it could be for the better. Like we just don't know what's happening, and we know that we don't like change. So any change that he's instituting, we don't like, and we're going to come up with all sorts of stories about what's happening with that change, and they may be valid. Those stories may be valid. But at the same time, they may not be, like, we may be missing some bigger picture that's happening. Like, maybe all these changes are happening for the betterment of democracy, or to have something, even some type of government that is even better than what was there before. We just don't know. You're presuming it's all going to be worse, but we don't know. What would you say when you think about, this horizontal and vertical? What would, I don't know if you kind of even had the same response to or politics, or if you try to stay away from it, or what do you think about all this? Not to get into politics, but so much as
Right.
my personal reaction, my husband's personal reaction, and I think someone who loves Trump is going to have a different personal reaction. They'll probably go to the point like, why are all these Democrats just whining all the time? There's a valid reason. Everyone's going to have their different perspectives, and I
Right.
view all of them as valid.
Well, look, I think that's important for us to understand is that uh, everybody has an opinion, right? And everybody's opinion is probably wrong, right? Depending on their perspective. And we have to understand that our opinions do bind us, right? And look, this whole dynamic, like you say, maybe it's the best thing that could ever happen to this country. Maybe it's the worst thing, right? And in some ways, we don't have a lot of control on it. And I'm not suggesting people want to protest and this and that. I don't get in that. But from the perspective of our own freedom, our spiritual freedom, right? Then how we react to the world is what determines whether we are bound within our own misunderstanding, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it really depends on what is really important to us in this life? If our true spiritual liberation, if coming to the experience of recognizing that we are only that supreme consciousness, then we have to be willing to suspend, to become still, all of our thoughts, all of our reactions, all of our what about me, reaction to stuff, which doesn't mean we're rejecting the world, doesn't mean we don't care about the world, etc. But what it means is we're not prepared for the world to steal our freedom from us, right? And in fact, so many times the challenges of life are the very gift that free us from the misunderstanding that, and therefore creates a challenge for us, right? And it's, people can get really caught up in, whatever story, whether it's politics or whether it's, this or that. And, it's not to say that it's wrong or right, but mostly it's not to judge, is what he's doing wrong or right. It's judge, am I sacrificing my own inner pure awareness to fight that dynamic, right? And it really gets to, again, what is the purpose of our life? Our purpose is not to be a good American or be a bad American. Our purpose in our life is to know God. And anything that distracts us from that pulls us away from that, is bad, if you want to call it bad, because we allow it to to steal our life, to steal the very gift that we have been given by the highest consciousness within us, is to know that pure freedom, right?
So here's what I'm taking. So if this here's an alternative alternative way of responding to this whole situation, right? So you hear the news report late last night on the West Coast, at least. You hear the news report.
Right.
Oh, all these like flashing alarms and exclamation points and question marks kind of start popping up in your head, or irritation. I mean, I don't, depending on what side you sit on, and so you go and say, "What? I don't want to lose my freedom, because I can actually go like the fire truck. I could be captivated by all this. My energy could go externally, horizontally, all over the place, worried about this stuff. Or I could just go back and decenter and say, my purpose in life is to understand God better. How does this experience affect me? And how does this help me understand God better? Instead of judging, is that what you meant?
Exactly right. And I'll tell you an amazing story. About 10 years ago, I read this article that some person was writing a book, and they had interviewed this Tibetan monk. And he wasn't some high order Tibetan monk, just your Joe Blow Tibetan monk.
Okay.
And he had been in prison by the Chinese for a long time and tortured. And this person said to him, well, don't you hate the Chinese, right? And he looked at this person and he said, no, because I couldn't afford to hate the Chinese, because if I had got caught in hating the Chinese and closed my heart, I would have lost my freedom. And I tell you, man, I mean, that just cut through me like a razor, because here's this person that was living in this horrible situation, right? And yet somehow in himself, he realized that through all that profound difficulty, that was not going to take his freedom away from him. Only if he gave it away, only if he lost his center, right? He said, only if I had closed my heart, I would have lost my freedom. And I think that's, let's keep this stuff in context, right? And right. Life is an extraordinary gift, and we give away that gift because we get caught up in some dynamic, some I won't call it superficial, even though there's a superficiality to it, right? But that's what we're perpetually doing, is looking to reinforce our own misunderstanding. And if we get caught in duality, we're not going to ever understand unity.
Okay, so people who are not familiar with this whole idea about duality and unity, so you talk about your practice is non-dual tantric
Right.
practice, and
Yeah.
so it's like we are not there, even though it feels like I'm separate from you. You're in a different state than I am, both
Right.
physically and mentally, maybe. I think yes,
Right.
mentally for sure, but physically we're in a different location. You're talking about so when you're talking about non-dual and dual, help folks who aren't familiar with those terms understand
Okay.
them.
Well, dual means two,
Hmm.
right? And if there's two, there's three, and then there's 10 million,
Hmm.
right? Non-dual means no duality, one thing, right? One consciousness. And what's hard for people to really understand and takes years of practice is that there is only consciousness and there's only this supreme consciousness, and everything that's happening within that is part of the energy and the expression of that consciousness, but it's not separate from that consciousness,
Hmm.
right? And duality exists in duality only, in the sense that it only exists when we're engaging things in terms of two-ness. Me and you, it and that and those guys, me and Trump, that's and in the mind, the ego, and what's called manas, mind, is in fact the level of consciousness within us that only sees duality, sees
Hmm.
itself. I am separate,
Hmm.
right? I am different, right? And so if we perpetuate that experience by perpetually engaging things as me and it, then we're only going to stay, if you will, caught within that level. So
Right.
we have to look past the duality and see and experience and establish ourselves in that experience of unity where there is me, there's CJ, there's the fire truck, there's Trump, and yet that we understand that that's all happening in one field of consciousness, right? And it's never separate. The
Hmm.
form, the expression, if you will, the dualistic experience is not separate from that experience of unity, but it is two different experiences, and we can choose that experience of unity.
I see. So then you talk about freedom. It's a freedom to choose whether to interact with this energy, whether it's Trump or the fire truck or last night I was really hungry during my meditation. I like so hungry because I had 14 vials of blood taken for me for a blood test,
Wow.
and I was just meditating. And I thought, I'm so hungry. I cannot meditate right now. And I thought, that's just a feeling. So if you just rest in stillness, see if you can not focus on this feeling, but just focus on the stillness. And I did. I don't know what happened. I actually was so hungry after the the meditation gong. I was going to get up, but I just stayed there for a while because I literally had no thought in my head. It was just sitting there with no thought in my head, which was
Yeah,
so
yeah,
bizarre to even have that happen in my
and
head.
how perfect, because what really happened in there is that as the thought construct started to kind of grab your attention, you just let it go and let it go and let it go, and then after a while, you know, it just has no energy to keep, kind of repeating itself, and all of a sudden you find yourself in this field where that thought is like a dog wagging its tail, is going around, but it just doesn't. It's just you're not. It's happening somewhere, in your awareness, but it's not happening. Your awareness is more fully present in a place of stillness.
Yeah,
Right.
and it was the weirdest sensation to have no thought. I'm like, am I sleeping? I'm like, that was my thought, right? Am I sleeping? I don't
Right.
think I'm sleeping. I'm just
No.
incredibly still.
Yeah.
And I just
And
sat
then
there.
yeah. And how perfect. And then from that place of stillness, you can continue to really open and surrender in yourself, and this vibrating dynamic consciousness will reveal itself, right?
Hmm.
So the
Hmm.
stillness is as I said, it's a doorway, but it's also just part of the dynamic of this vibrating presence is powerful, and it's in fact that vibration, that radiance is the energy of life. It's the energy of ourself, and so we can be connected to that, and we can follow it to that pure essence, which is our own consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And in our sadhana, in the practice of tantric practices, right, of the awakening of Kundalini, we're also following that, if you will, through the psychic body, right, and opening up the psychic body. And ultimately, the divine thread is an experience. Most people can feel the different chakras, and lots of people get caught up. This is in that chakra, and that's in that chakra, and I don't really relate to it, because ultimately it's not even about the chakras. We first use the chakras to connect to this flow of energy inside, and as we establish ourselves in that flow, then we find within that energy and within the Sushumna, there are actually 4 levels of the Sushumna, and the core of the Sushumna is called the divine thread. The traditional term is called Brahmanadi, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's not just the path of energy, it is the path of consciousness, and that we talk about it as it rises unimpeded, doesn't touch the chakras, right? It moves all the way through to the top of the head, the space above the head, which is called Dwadashanta, right? And that is the abode of the goddess Para, which is goddess is energy, right? And so we connect to that energy and we follow it to its source, right? And so stillness is a doorway into that presence. It's also becoming very still within the Sushumna, really ultimately allows this ever-present connection, this thread of connection that's within us, to reveal itself and say, "Here I am," right? Then we work to establish ourselves in that kind of connection energetically, right?
So I want to step back a little bit, because before we get into, and I really I want to just go back to what you said, but for folks who may not be familiar with non-dual tantric practice, so there's these concepts that probably a lot of people who aren't familiar know, like, there's a soul, there's a spirit, there's God, there's ego. You talked about ego, or the manas, which is that which chooses to believe in this duality, right? That's one of them. And then is there and the God you talked about is para, I guess, is one of the goddesses.
Right.
Para. So in non-dual tantra, there's goddesses and gods. So there's Shiva and Shakti. And so tell us a little bit about the interplay of Shiva, Shakti, and the goddesses, because people may not be familiar with that frame.
Okay, well, and certainly within the particular practice lineage that I am, they're really not. In Hindu culture, there's hundreds of goddesses and gods, right? And that's, but they're all an expression of that's one awareness. In non-dual tantric practices, the it's really the discussion of consciousness and energy.
Okay.
If you will, consciousness is Shiva, what I call God, because I don't have the connotation of God being this bearded guy sitting up there or whatever, or evil God, or like a lot of people. So I use the word interchangeable, but Shiva means consciousness, right? And goddesses are energy. They are the power of consciousness to create. Right? So you talk about Shiva and Shakti, you're talking about Shiva and Para, right? And there's different terms for that goddess, right? There's different terms, for Shiva, Atman, right? But it's really about consciousness and energy, because there's field of consciousness and there's its power to express itself, right? To create. Our mothers created us, our fathers were participated, right? But both were necessary, and they're never separate. And so that's the fundamental distinction in non-dual tantric practices, was the recognition that there wasn't just this inert consciousness, that consciousness has power, that it has energy, and it expresses itself, that orthodox, normal, lots of practices, and particularly non-dual practices from India, didn't recognize energy, right?
Hmm.
Well, there's consciousness, right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
these sadhus, these ancient inner scientists, turned inside themselves, looking for consciousness, and what they found was energy.
Mm.
And
Mm.
they found that within themselves. They found the psychic body, and then they followed that, and they recognized that that energy is the power of consciousness, and in fact,
Mm.
is the power of consciousness to create us as individuals.
Okay.
Kundalini isn't something that creates other things. That is the term that creates us as individual expressions of that pure consciousness.
So that's equivalent to kind of like the idea of a soul. There's like an individual expression of that consciousness in this particular human configuration
You,
or body.
you can think of it like that.
Okay.
The distinction is that it's not a separate soul from that consciousness, right? It is an individuated expression of that consciousness, right? And our sadhana really is about the transformation of our awareness to recognize that we're not separate. First, we to the I am this individuated expression of this divine whole, to ultimately I am simply that divine whole.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And
So the cosmology then is there's the psychic body, there's this
right,
divine thread, and then
right,
there's consciousness that's coming down, and then
yeah,
through that is energy that's expressed through Shakti. That's actually the movement in my energy. It's a manifestation of those consciousness. So
yeah.
tell me, and then there's Kundalini, which is say again what Kundalini is. So I'm trying to figure
Well,
out the whole
okay.
the
Kundalini is
taxonomy of your
yes.
idea.
You can think of Kundalini as we are the individuated expression of pure consciousness. That's Kundalini, right?
Okay,
Now
got it.
that creates
Oh.
us in three dimensions.
Uh-huh.
Prana Kundalini means is the energy, the Kundalini energy that gives life to our physical body,
Uh-huh.
right?
Okay.
Without that Kundalini, we don't got a body, right?
Okay, yes.
Right. Chit Kundalini is the Kundalini energy that gives life to our mental and emotional construct,
Okay.
right? Para Kundalini is the energy that gives life to our spiritual essence, right? Right.
Okay, got it.
And
Okay,
so
good.
then that's why we have a body. It's why we have, mind. It's why we have emotions, right? And it's also why we can have at our core, and then we can discover and connect to that core, that spiritual essence, right?
Okay, got it. So we have these three ways of expressing through the body, through the mind, through spiritual essence. And so really
It's,
it's how is that energy going to express itself, right? How is that
yes,
Kundalini going to express itself? Is it going to be me having an emotional outburst or me thinking about something or me tying into my spiritual whole and
yes,
connecting?
and spiritual discipline is available to us because we have the choice. We can be a raving lunatic,
Right.
right? Or
Right.
we can live in stillness, right?
Right.
And the every experience that we have in the world, every encounter that we have in the world, every encounter we have within ourselves provides us that choice to choose what level of consciousness we want to live in.
Right. So that's the freedom that we ultimately get to choose instead of having our emotions take over or our mind take over or even our spiritual self take over. We have the freedom to choose how we
Well,
manifest.
you would say, in a sense, that we're choosing our spiritual self, right?
Hmm.
But in that choosing, we're not rejecting our body, right? We're not saying our mind and our emotions aren't real. We know how real they are. They hurt like hell,
Right.
right? Right. But we can choose to say, no, I understand that's just simply a dimension of my own consciousness, and I choose to engage in a deeper part of
Right.
myself.
Like when I was meditating and like was incredibly hungry from giving these 14 vials of blood, I
Right.
chose like, no, And stay on this cushion and see what happens. And so that's a choice. So I have the freedom to choose. And then when I got up, I was like, I'm hungry. And I chose to walk over
It's
and eat.
time to eat.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's time to eat.
that's exactly right.
Okay,
Yes.
so someone wrote in and said, where do these words come from? So these are Sanskrit words coming from what?
Yes, these are Sanskrit words coming from, well, from the words Sanskrit is, just primordial language, but the particular words we're talking about come from the non-dual tantric tradition of, in Eastern Asia and India, right? Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So they
And
have,
and yeah.
oh, go ahead.
So, different Eastern Asian, traditions use the terms. Simply, it's not just non-dual tantric. The particular tradition practice I'm in is what's called tantric Shaivism, right?
Mm-hmm.
It really originated in Kashmir, right?
Okay.
Sometimes it's called Kashmiri Shaivism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it really, this non-dual practice really came into its full heyday starting in the 7th century, right?
Wow. Okay.
As I was said before, then there wasn't so much discussion of non-dual practices. There was dualistic practice. It was me and God, right? And there
Right.
was this supreme consciousness, and then I don't know exactly how I got here, but whatever, right?
Right.
And so these these okay, whatever, right?
Right.
These 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 yogis sat down on their cushion and closed their eyes, looking for the answer to that, right? And as I said earlier, they discovered that they are this vibrating reality. They are this energy, right? And then they were able to just keep looking inside, and then they discovered this pathway. One of the tenets,
Mm.
the canons of tantric practices is in fact the recognition that we have a psychic body, right?
In the
And that
psychic
that
body, what does
psychic
it mean
body
to,
is,
what does the psychic body mean?
well, the chakras, right?
Ah, okay, I got it. So
But,
we have a
but the
body that's
chakras,
made of these energy centers, and that it's connect, and it has
yes,
this
exactly.
connection to
And
this higher.
yes,
Okay,
and the chakras are simply centers along the sushumna, right? The sushumna is that central channel of
right.
consciousness and energy, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do is to awaken and purify and free the energy at our own core as this individuated expression of that higher force, so that it can move back through this very channel that created us, right, and reconnect back to its source, right?
Okay, so I want to share with folks and you actually have a kind of how grace unfolds in your book. And
Uh-huh.
I had a very similar kind of process to the one that's outlined here in this book, where I was going, I was I reached a point in my life where I thought, I want God, I surrender. I know that consciousness God has a better plan than any plan, even though I'm a planner and I have good plans, that there's a
Right,
better plan than anything that I could actually
right.
plan myself. And so I went with this great desire to finally surrender. And I sat in meditation for over like 3 or 4. This is, I've been on a spiritual practice for a really long time, but
Right.
a lot of thinking, of what does it mean? Why would I want to surrender to God? All this kind of thinking about it, talking to people. In fact, I talked to you, I think 2 or 3 weeks before I actually had this experience. I don't know if you don't know that, but you were part of my
Right.
whole educational process into this. So I wanted to, so grace descends, our consciousness begins to ascend in response. The wish to know God arises, which I reached that point where I'm like, I desperately want to know. And we
Mm-hmm.
seek a means to know God. I did not have a guru, but I went and practiced for 5 days and sat in meditation, and then nothing was happening. I was hoping that something would happen, and I don't even know what the something that I wanted to have happen would be. But finally, I
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, screw it. This is not very religious, but I said, oh, screw it. I give
Right.
up. Let's stop.
Right.
Just enjoy the meditation and relax. Just stop trying
Yeah.
to make anything happen. And the minute I did that, I had some just gigantic explosion in my head, and I could experience beauty and the most profound, like I experienced almost the truth of beauty. And I can't even tell you what I experienced, but I saw and felt, it was more of a felt sense of beauty. And I was just crying because it was so unbelievably exquisite. And
Wonderful.
yeah, so I assume that that's something. I don't know what that is. It's probably grace unfolding. And then the final day of this meditation, I was shaking in this meditation. Like my breath was coming up very fast, and my body was shaking. And we're in a meditation with 500 people in the room, so it's a close encounter and a very uncomfortable one. So when you're breathing, you're thinking that person next to me is like, shut it, like
Yeah.
stop
Right.
breathing,
Right.
stop shaking,
Right.
whatever you're doing, just stop it. It's irritating me. So I'm trying to
Right.
contain myself, and meanwhile, trying to contain this energy that was trying to flow out was just made it worse, actually. Um,
Hmm.
so finally, in the last day of this meditation, I turned to the people towards me. I'm like, I'm really sorry. I'm not sure what's trying to release itself or happen, but I'm just going to let it rip. And it may be me shaking. It may be me making noises. That's what's been happening. And I've been trying to like stop all of this, but I'm going to let it rip. So just like tell me to go away. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm here. It's the last day. And I did it. And my arms were flailing around. I was shaking. My breathing was going up. And I had no flipping idea what was happening. And then someone said, "Oh, that's Kundalini rising," and I was like, "What's that?" That's a Kundalini awakening experience. I'm like, I don't know what the hell that is. So I started reading books on Kundalini, and actually, the more I read about it, the more I was in my mind, and almost the more distant that experience
Right. Right.
became. And then I kind of got, it was just a weird experience. I didn't know what to expect. And then that was in February. In September that same year, I had an experience where my husband and I were celebrating our anniversary. And I had another thing where I just like, we were making love, and I just like kind of went into, I don't even know what happened. And I was like literally shaking, and all I could see was light in and out, in and out, in and out of my body. And I could just experience light, just light all over the place.
Hmm.
And then, and then I couldn't feel anything. Like my body was numb. I couldn't taste anything. I, I assume that this is some form of something aside from insanity, because I don't think it is insanity.
Right.
And this time I didn't try to read about anything, but is this what you talk about, this process of Kundalini? And so you talk about our consciousness rises on the connection, and this allows us to perceive what we could not see before. And I can tell you, after I had this experience, I would look up at the clouds in the sky and just start crying because it was just so exquisitely beautiful. And then I realized like we began to experience and understand ourselves as an individual expression of the divine. I'm like, I don't know what happened, but that was some reality that I didn't even know existed. And then we live in from a state of surrender and experience of unity. I'm not there yet, but I'm desperately trying. So how would you explain? Because I'm sure you've had these kind of experiences. I'm trying not to get too taken over by them, because what I've noticed when I read stuff on the internet, people get taken over by these things, and they go to grandiose proportions, which I don't even think is meant to be. It's just this is energy moving through me, is where I've concluded. But
Right.
what
Well,
do
I
you?
think that's in its essence, that's what it is. It is that energy moving through you, but it is more specifically that energy awakening in you. That is a Kundalini awakening experience, right? And you know, look, you started, grace descends, and then shit happens, right? I
Right,
mean,
massive
you know,
stuff changed
look,
around.
you know, when Shaktipat means descent of grace.
Hmm.
Only God gives Shaktipat. Some people talk, Guru gives Shaktipat. Gurus transmit energy, but the point is, when this grace,
Mm.
which you can call it, descends into us, but opens up from within itself, right? If
Hmm.
God dwells within us at ourselves, He's not above us dropping Shaktipat on it. It's this awakening inside, right?
Mm.
And it is this buried consciousness in it that's awakening, and it uses energy to do so, right?
Ah.
And it uses energy then to begin to express itself, and your very experiences is that awakening, and all the wiggling and jiggling and the flailing and this and that, those are called kriyas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kriya just means that's the response to that energy. You know, when we get off the phone and go stick your finger in a 240 float plug,
Right.
that's energy, right?
Right.
And you probably become numb after that, right?
Yes.
And so when
uh,
this awakening starts to take place, then there is this very intense rising of our own consciousness. And sometimes people kind of pass out or this or that because it's like going up in an elevator too fast, right? Right. And
mm-hmm.
so what you're experiencing is that kind of awakening, and what you don't want to do is to stop it, right? You want to in fact discover some practice in yourself that can in fact help you to cultivate that awakening and channel that awakening. So because when it starts to happen without some discipline, without perhaps some guidance, right, then that energy gets released into all of the different dimensions of ourselves that we just talked about, our mental and emotional
Mm.
stuff, our bodies, and then it can make us a little nuts, et cetera. And so it scares people, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but it's because they don't know how to channel it, right?
Mm.
Somebody once asked me, well, should I be afraid if my Kundalini awakens? And I said, you should be afraid if it doesn't, because that our own spiritual liberation, our own ascent to know and merge with God is that Kundalini awakening. And
Mm.
so when it happens, it seems spontaneous, but it was because of grace. And what you, in your particular instance, want to do is to continue to cultivate the capacity to connect to that force and to channel it through your psychic body so that it can expand your own consciousness. But
Mm.
you definitely don't want to try to stop it, right?
Mm. Okay. I haven't tried to. I have. It's more like a. I guess this is a new part of myself. I'm not trying to. I'm happy. Like I'm happy that it's happening. I'm not getting upset about it. It's just energy, and I just assume, well, it's just energy. What can I do? I can't. If I try to stop it, it's like trying to stop something that. I mean, as I read your book, it seemed like if energy is coming up and it's kinking and my neck is shaking and things, it's because it's hitting blockages because they're impurities, right? Either
Yeah,
you called them psychic knots, which are impurities or tension or energy blocks that have been created through past experiences, karma, whatever. So
right.
why would I want to stop that? I mean, I might as well just like, if you're going to go clean the house, like clean the house, go for it.
Yeah.
So I've
And
been,
but I think what's important is not just to say, okay, don't stop it, but to actually emphasize and cultivate it rather than
mm,
just say, well, it's happening, to recognize that it's happening and to truly cultivate that through your meditation practices, etc.
okay. I'll have to talk to you about that off air because I don't know exactly
Okay,
what that means or
sure.
what to do. Um,
Right.
this has been fantastic. I feel I still have like 15 other questions, so we would love to have you on again.
I'm I'm here as long as you want me to be here, and if we're done, we're done. You
Okay, well, I'm going to call you again
back.
because I actually have to go, but I love this book. We've been talking to Natty G and his book, The Divine Thread, this Stillness Sutras. Very beautiful work. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm happy to be here, and I just want to end by saying, which was part of my introduction, always look on the bright side of life.
I love that. All right,
Yeah,
tell us
so
people your website too if people want to go to your
uh,
website.
my website is trikashala.com,
Okay.
TRIKASHALA.com.
Okay.
And that's the name of my spirit, my practice, my community, and then there's connection to me there, and so people are welcome to go there, and they can email me if they want or ask questions, and I'm really happy to have spent the time with all of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Blessings.
Take care. Bye
Thank you.
bye.
Bye bye.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. Would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.